how do we live or die together? How do we imagine this in the Roma context? What is our strategies for the togetherness, for the belonging, for the oneness, and not for the individual and subjective and personal strategies? It matters what thoughts think thoughts. It matters what knowledges know knowledges. It matters what relations relate relation. It matters what words word words. This is Staying with the Troublemaking Kin in the Sturu Scene by Donna Haraway in 2016.
Why we don't have a Roma leading curators in these institutions?
ERIAC joined the partnership with Manifesta 14 in a Western Balkans project in order to ensure that Roma culture and Roma audience are adequately represented in this important biennial, and by facilitating spaces for deepening the understanding of different cultures and providing room for participative and creative encounters. Manifesta 14 may, in our opinion, play a pivotal role in connecting people and catalyzing positive change in the Western Balkans and beyond. We are hoping that this is not a one-time and ad hoc cooperation, but a long-time partnership that is taking roots in these initial discussions and in these pilot cooperations. It matters what thoughts think thoughts. It matters what knowledges know knowledges. It matters what relations relate relation. It matters what words word words. This is Staying with the Troublemaking Kin in the Sturu Scene by Donna Haraway in 2016. How do we relate to living in symbiosis in a damaged planet, in a nature that is all of ours, in the understanding that we are one? These are all natural narratives in the Roma context, but how do we connect the future of our prosperity for all of us in the Anthropocene and beyond? The very first question is, how do we relate to the meta-narratives, the narratives below, the visible, or on the peripheries, and how do we relate to the Haraway quote ourselves?
But what I wanted to talk today, it's also the importance of the space that is given to speak about our culture and to tell our stories, because it's a limited number of institutions that involve Roma arts and cultures in their activities and so on. And when it comes to these initiatives, it's only targeted to the donors. So we don't need only donors to offer the space, but we need also governments, like local governments, the governments of the respective countries to offer this space, because the Roma arts and culture was part of the European culture since centuries and is still there. But now we are in a moment to unveil these cultures and to promote them and to give the possibility to cultivate them. And this is also a good possibility that Manifesta was very open to collaborate and also document, and there are also some other initiatives and institutions that give the space, but that's not still enough. I mean, we need to create the space that offers the continuation. So this is how I want also to answer to this. First, we need a kind of infrastructure while we speak about our stories.
Events like this, but also obviously like Manifesta, is I believe also an invitation to individuals to also take up initiatives on their own. And I think it's amazing that we have two artists also on the panel, that it shows also that commitment to speaking with your own voice and not necessarily following others or having to conform, but really having that platform, as you say, to really be able to also show the difference. Because I think what happens very often is that there is this sense of uniformity, that everything would be one because it's one community, right? I mean, if we're talking specifically where we are today in ERIAC, but there is also that diversity within, for example, the Roma community, and I think that's the beauty of that community too.
We saw only the outside perspective regarding our history and culture. I came here from Kassel, from Documenta, and there I saw something that I very liked. We are going to show there that not what the others expect to see, but what we want to show to them. There are many artists that I admire, that their work is very great, and it will be shocking, I think, for the audience, for the others, to see that something that is introduced or stories that will be told from a Roma perspective.
There is one note that really stuck with me, and this is how we tell stories that destabilize the power and also majoritarian narratives. And you're sitting here because you're experts of this strategy. It would be really nice to hear, what from your personal histories you can show us. We know that, for example, May 16 is relevant because once Roma started writing Roma history, we discovered that the history of the Holocaust is not the history of victimhood. We have agency. We have the power to resist, the power to survive. We are fighting back, revolting. The only one uprising is connected to the Roma people. We realize that there are many stories of escapes, heroic saving of each other, children and other victims of the Holocaust. So this rewriting of the story was very essential for creating a different narrative and fighting the majoritarian narrative of, for example, the Holocaust history. As it was taught to us, not as it's written by us. So my question is, from your own experiences, what examples would you share with us in these narratives that create agency?
I don't have a special recipe to share, but I want to bring two personal actions and stories that I did myself. In Albania, we have, when I was in primary school, every Monday we started the class singing the Albanian anthem before starting the classes. And for me was, in the beginning I didn't know, I mean, my mother tongue was Romani, so I started to learn Albanian in the school. And was interesting for me that, and what I did, together with my family in my school, in the same school, we started a Monday with both, with Romani anthem and with Albanian one. It was the first school, and they were like 6 or 7 years ago, and now in all those schools that are in the city of Fier and some others, they are organizing for 8th of April the same thing. They start with the symbol, and they organize cultural activities regarding the Roma, the Roma culture and history, which was nothing in our school. At the same time, regarding this, I wanted to share with you a work that I did, which is the swallow's nest, that I use it as a metaphor. I install it in public institution to speak for cultures like our culture that are not part of public institution. Although we are living for years, for example, in our countries, we are not represented. If you come, for example, in Albania, you don't see nothing regarding Romani culture in the National Museum. So this is also in other countries as well. I mean, you have small initiatives, but that does not prove nothing. So, I mean, I'm still in what I said in the opening of the discussion. We have a lot to offer, but we need the space. We need the space to talk about ourselves although I mean we were part of this European culture where we took and we gave and we interacted, but the most important that we need now is the space.
Have a personal story and have a personal initiative and go for it. I think that there is no other recipe except for be ambitious, be curious. I think some things that I was just writing up is that take the space. I mean, I think, the space is there. You have public space, you have online spaces. I understand that there is always a more formalistic way of thinking when it comes to representation and how you want to show stuff. But think out of the box, because this is also really what really works today. I think you can be very catchy if you own the medium that you're using to really appropriate it for what you want to say and to really condition your own voice instead of constantly following a sort of an exhibition cube format or, I don't know, creating some sort of a platform. You are that platform. And I think that's great about this. I'm actually really happy to have heard this because it's, I think it's that sort of enrichment. And I'll tell you my personal example. So obviously in the introduction, there's the Prince Claus Fund and there's, the Netherlands, but I'm from the Balkans. So the reason why I'm here also is because there is a personal commitment to it. I grew up from different backgrounds and I'm sure there is Romani when you dig in. But there is definitely differences in terms of cultures in my family, and that was always a problem where I came from, although it was in Macedonia, which is generally seen as sort of more liberal in terms of minorities and communities. Back in the day when I grew up, it wasn't. So what I did was, obviously, I've been living in the Netherlands now, but I realized I wanted to do an initiative which I thought was important for rectifying a wrong when I grew up. And the wrong that I grew up was that I grew up always feeling very different because I was different. I'm gay, and growing up in Macedonia at the time when I was sort of openly gay to my family and my friends, it was a tough job. So it started from there, the idea of what can you do to give back to a community, not necessarily LGBT related as much as just the difference, the feeling alienated, feeling like you don't belong. And I'm sure that asking anybody in this room, I'm sure all of you will have had that experience, regardless of what social status you're coming from, what ethnic diversity you have or not. So a year and a half ago, I decided to take up the initiative in my own hands and do something. And I set up what's now called the VID Foundation for Photography, and it's a platform that supports young visual storytellers in the Balkans specifically, for them to really tell their own stories. So it's really inviting people to come up with their own ideas and pitch these ideas. And then we select one winner that's a financial winner to really boost also financially, because I think finance is also really important. But there's also 2 prizes which are mentorship prizes. So we then couple these young visual storytellers with, depending on what they want to do, with the appropriate mentor to really help them for 6 months to work intensively. And I think, it might not be the best way to do something or to create representation and give people the opportunity to really amplify their voice, but it was a way based on what I knew and the experience I have and the network I have to really sort of bring that closer to the Balkans. But at the same time, always daring to fail. And I think that's what's beautiful about your stories. I think your brother's story, he took that leap of faith because it is dangerous. I mean, it can feel very daunting and dangerous when you do something that's counter-narrative in a way, and when you're going to be standing out and doing something which probably society is not going to see as okay or as good or as positive. So I think daring to make a mistake and daring to just be different is something that I would definitely encourage.
We need to have Roma leading curators, not only just co-curators and so on, but it's the thing that you say, to see it from a Roma perspective. Of course, we need to think out of the box. Yes, of course we need to think, because we will not think what's only into this, because otherwise we will put ourselves into the periphery.
If you have opportunity, just make it to be BAM.
it's amazing how we are already speaking about how to empower storytellers. You already addressed infrastructure, and you're excited to talk more about empowering storytellers, but the arch of this discussion, after your subjective experiences, requires another angle. So if you allow me, I will go back to, again, Manifesta and Donna Haraway, and also May 16th. Haraway and also Manifesta explains that a real radical change to reconfigure our relations to Earth and to ourselves requires, instead of the autopoiesis and the self-making, we need to have the trouble of imagining living together. Just like May 16th was about living or dying together. How do we live or die together? How do we imagine this in the Roma context? What is our strategies for the togetherness, for the belonging, for the oneness, and not for the individual and subjective and personal strategies? And I believe that this is exactly the Stulucene and the Anthropocene idea that Manifesta is playing with. How to imagine living and dying together on a damaged earth, and will this prove this idea of imagining this prove more conducive to the kind of thinking that would provide a means to building more livable lives? How do we think about prosperity for all of us?
I mean, there's a lot of fancy words in that statement. Yeah. So I'm going to sort of not use fancy words. I'm going to use sort of more, I'm going to endeavor to use more simple words, because then it sort of tends to come more from the heart. But for me, that is, and I think the most radical thing you can do is to be yourself, truly yourself. And I think that's why artists are dangerous, because if they wouldn't be, why would they be imprisoned? Why would they be prosecuted? So there's something that the smart people that run our societies understand about that risk in terms of cultural expression, identity, and arts. So I think what happens very often is when we talk about communities or minorities or, underexposure or etc., there is the tendency that the majority community will come up to you and say, hey, what can I do for you? Equally, funders will do that. But you need to sort of turn that around and say, no, what can I do for you? Because you don't get it. The point about having curators who are Roma and not having, in fact, a lot of artists that have the right exposure, that have all the context and the sort of the network needed, right? It really is a question of not really what they can do for us, but what we can do for them. Because I think educating people, and just, as I said, for me also just this event, I think is really important, because you have to build on well, first of all, you build on yourself, obviously, in your self-expression, but you also build on the community of allies that you create. And I think that allyship is very important, because then it no longer becomes a question between us and them, but it does remain a sort of an increased community of everything together. And I think that's in terms of sort of what you're talking about in, Manifesta and Anthropocene, etc. I think it fundamentally comes down to radicalizing the self-expression to an extent where it really enables people to have a comfort zone to be who they really are without any fear.
My thinking is how to through art and through different narratives to provoke majority that change their thoughts about Roma people who are actually who they are living in a dehumanizing environment. Okay, I am here where I am. I am a PhD student, and I am live in with others in a multicultural, intercultural, not intercultural, but multicultural environment. But what about others? Okay, what I can do, like Roma woman who approach this level, what I can do for my people who are still there, where are they? like artists, like journalists. So I can, in my point of view, I can make reportage who represent different narratives about Roma people, for example.
I also think that your work with the youth is extremely important. I was hoping that you will share some of those strategies of how you create this idea of we are one when you are working together with disadvantaged youth. And then the bigger question, of course, of this, the beautiful words that I quoted from Haraway, really is how do we understand, our oneness with the majoritarian strategies. And to you, Saad, as well, you have many artworks who speak about our knowledge about the universe, our Roma traditions in the contemporary art context. Like you take clay and you show the ways that they were applied traditionally in the Roma context and share this knowledge and contribute this knowledge through the channels of contemporary art and contemporary art genres to the majority, starting from political strategies all the way to beauty and facial expertise. So, it's really important, I believe, that you use contemporary art to channel your knowledge towards the oneness, towards all of us.
I cannot say it like that, whether we need because the question is like very strong, like whether we need a radical action to do something in this togetherness and so on. But we are actually doing in our daily life as Roma. We are giving and taking. Contribution between one another. And also regarding, for example, my work, the work that I do, and you quoted one of them that I use this special kind of mud and taking the position in the government where and the fear that internal fear that I had always, that once I get this position, what I'm going to do? Am I going to continue the same activism, or am I going to adapt to the system? So I'm doing this work, and one of the women that is on that performance is my mother. And who else beside your family wants you to become cleaner? So we take this kind of shishik, and they are in my office, and they cover me in that kind of mud as a mean to keep me safe. So, but the word mudding in the political language in Albania is used as something insulting. So I'm using this kind of mud for purifying. And so to giving the message, so although I am here in this institution, that doesn't mean that I will adapt in this on the comfortability that the institution says, because the mindset is once you go there, that means that you're gonna adapt. So, but as I am coming from the very grassroots, I come from a village. I come from a Roma family, which is not rich, and even not middle. It's not middle class. It's a poor. With the full all the meaning of that. So, and I'm going to this institution. I think I already sent a message. To the society that I live there, and also this works talks about it. So I am making this culture part of the others. And also, for example, the other word that I want to mention here is I don't have borders to protect, which is a word that was conserved in Roma families. And I'm taking this sentence and I offer it to everyone to make it theirs. So taking into the account in the political situation that in every country is the war in Ukraine and also on. So we are having a role, we are contributing, interacting between in this togetherness that we are living, and what you're talking about.
it's not just a question of sort of speaking out and asking people, you know, what can I do for you? It's a combination of things. And I think it also, it's also a chicken and egg story. Where do you really start? And I think that it doesn't always mean that if you come from a certain background, you can't make it. And I think it's great that you are that living example. But I think it's also amazing that people can look up to you, for example, and everybody who is more actively involved in any issue they believe in, and see an example of who they can become. And I think in representation, association to somebody like that is important, whether it's tone of skin, whether it's name that you have, whether it's the way that you speak about what you believe. I think you guys, generally, both of you or three of you that are here, and I think continuing to sort of give a platform to people to be able to really show their representation, affiliation, but also the invitation to actually be participative in the work that you do, to really engage with the community is important, because it demystifies also this idea of, oh, them and us. But I think that's why I think it's also a lot about what can you do for the majority that really has that mindset. And I think that that's something that, whether you like it or not, people are educated that way from a very young age, and that's the way that you're taught to think about differences and otherness. So I think, I think it's also, I think the fact that people can also recognize themselves in good examples, in successful examples, in inspirational examples, is something that will make people to think differently about just who they are and what they can do.
What should we do about that? Do you have any idea how we can fix that? How we can put some Roma role in some Serbian or Albanian or Macedonian film, but like we can represent that Roma are equal with others? For example, like Roma doctors or Roma some business manager or something like that?
I started a research regarding Romani people in the cinema in Albania, which was never published and still never finished. But during the process and the interviews in the archives, the film archives, I have understood a lot. But we need this kind of research to be done. Why? Because always has been seen as in an exotic way, a stereotypic way, and so on. It's also because the people that are involved in the movies are not Roma.
I would say hire Roma people to do the jobs, and you know, you invest in that, because it's not, of course, it's easy to say, it's like, it's always the case with minorities. It's like, yeah, you can't find anyone. Oh, there's nobody really that's that good. There's always somebody who's willing to do the job much better and work much harder, because they know that it's going to be an opportunity. So I think it's also a question of taking the leap of faith and actually trusting your vision. As if it's you, for example, that wants to bring this together, trust your own vision and trust the people around you. I think we generally have a sense of approaching things with a lot of distrust, and that's how you come to the stereotype, because you don't really talk openly, you don't participate. And I think there's also consultants you can hire. I mean, I understand, you know, if it's something very specific where it's difficult to find, I still believe you can find. I mean, this region is such a mixed region, and it's very easy to go beyond a border to find somebody else, although mentally that might sound very far. I think there's different ways how you can combine that, and at the end of the day, it would absolutely, I feel, add value to what you're doing, and it will be appreciated on both sides of that spectrum, not just within the Romani community, for example, but because it creates a different understanding, it's what puts you in the map as an artist, if it's an artwork or whatever. But
there is a lot of talk in the last 30 years what Roma need. And I usually say Roma situation is like a beaten body in an emergency. So you bring somebody beaten all over the body to the emergency, so whatever you do is good. Whatever you do on the body, it's useful. But what is the core? What is the most useful? This is what the conversation has to be about, because when we start listing needs, it's endless. Nobody can finish the needs. So we don't need the psychology of needy people. and I'm fascinated by what you said about how can we turn the conversation? What do you need from us? And I think that conversation doesn't happen because of a certain, I would say, mentality that has developed among the movements, human rights, assistentialist, social movements, social provision, projects, and so on, that is all about the need. And the area of culture is, I think, the most fascinating because we have given already so much. And we will continue to give because culture works in that way. It's exchange, constant. I'm sorry to bring economics to my question, but in economics, and especially in the area of trade, there is a concept called competitive advantage. So we should ask ourselves, what is the competitive advantage of Roma vis-a-vis those that live with us? This is where your question might have an answer. So what is our competitive advantage? What we do better than others, so others have to take it, even if they hate it. They have to. They might have stereotypes around us. I mean, Hannah Arendt wrote a lot about prejudice in politics as the root of totalitarian regimes and neo-Nazis. And she speaks about not stereotype, she speaks about prejudice in politics. This is where stereotypes becomes dangerous. But what is the stereotype about what we have as a competitive advantage? Arts and culture. And I think there is no question about that. So question might be turned, if we practice the dialogue that you perfectly put your finger on. What would you like us to do for you?
It reminds me, 2 or 3 years ago, the manager of Pink Floyd, previous manager of Pink Floyd, came in Albania, and he started to register to this saze, traditional music, which was done only by Roma and by Egyptians. But back that time, because I come from that village that this music somehow spread on, the Roma were beaten if they were playing this music. I mean, and it was like Talava today. It had a lot of Talava, it had a lot of stereotypes that time. And now, this guy comes and registers and does some activities with that, and Roma are zero mentioned as a contributor and the one that who did this music. And this is shown as only as for example, like Albanian traditional music, and there is not mentioned the contribution of our people. So we were already there. I mean, we need the dialogue. I mean, that to happen. But also a little reflection on the media in the movies and so on. I think needs to be changed also the approach. Because always when we are invited in televisions, we are invited only as Roma, to speak only for Roma issues. I mean, and this is for me not right, and somehow has to be changed, because maybe I cannot talk good in English about politics, but in Albania I can talk about politics and the art scene and so on. So also we need to be invited also some experts to talk about issues that do not necessarily belong to our origin. So, I mean, this is like we are framed always into a box that it's, okay, we have those, we have them only for that.
Do you agree with the competitive advantage?
This is how you slap somebody with their own hand, huh? No, it's a very good question. It's a good question because that's what happens when you're put in the situation to speak on behalf. I'm not the regular person that's on the street, in the sense that I also come from a minority. I understand that it's a different sort of composition of my life, obviously, as an identity. But it is a starting point that what I always wanted to do is take the Vid Foundation for Photography. We have an annual open call where we ask for visual storytellers all around the world, but it really specifically focuses on people who come from any sort of minority. And to this day, there's never been a Roma person who's applied. And I would love for that to happen because it's a way also to bring that story closer. So what you can do, I think, is really promote that, and it's not I'm sorry that it sounds maybe shamelessly self-promoting, but it is an opportunity because I think it's so important to bring that voice out into a domain that will just be very different than the usual domains where indeed you're put forward like, oh, tell us something about Roma issues. No, this will be a voice that you yourself choose to say, what do you really care for? And where does that come from? And it could come from the fact that you come from a certain background, or you were brought up in a different language and now studying a different language. There's so many things that we don't understand about the society we live in, but also because it's a taboo. So I think my question is, how can we jointly demystify and de-taboo so many things that just commonplace in our societies? But we're blind to it because we see it as a threat instead of an enrichment. So I think that, again, I'm not going to speak on behalf of anybody because I don't consider myself to come from a majority. And so, no, it's a good question, but it's an answer to a good question. No, absolutely, but I don't consider myself coming from a majority, and it's sometimes very difficult for people to grasp if they see what you look like, because very often there's that sort of obviously stereotype. And I had this discussion once, for example, in the US, when I had to talk about something and I told them that I come from a minority. I was about to get shot. They were like, what, that you're a white male, whatever. They assumed I was straight, which I was like, but whatever. And it's also deceiving. And I think that it's an invitation to also look at things differently and go beyond your own stereotype. But again, this is something that's at the core of the education that we get in this environment. So I think that there's a lot to be rectified in that sense, to also recognize what it is and constantly correct yourself as moving forward. So I think exposure to things, I think invite more people to be part of events like this. People who potentially are your allies, but they're simply too ignorant to know it.